Hello and welcome to my channel. This is Peter Akbar. This is my second video in the series of responding to the video Pious Fraud on Intellectual Kshatriya YouTube channel. In my previous video, I focused on the plagiarism and false representation of the scholars which was committed by Esther Dhanraj. In this video, I'm not going to do the same thing, but I'm going to focus more on the so-called evidences that she provided to prove that Christianity committed fraud and forgery. Now, before we could look at these accounts, I want to talk about something called a logical argument. In a logical argument, you have a conclusion, and every conclusion is supported by the premises. And these premises, in order for them to support a conclusion, these premises need to be strong, and these premises need to correspond to the facts. Only then the whole argument can be considered as a sound argument. For the conclusion that Christianity committed fraud and forgery, for this conclusion, she used various premises. That is, she used the story from the Old Testament, from the Chronicles, from the Book of Chronicles, 2 Chronicles chapter 34. It's a story about Josiah finding a book. In Josiah's time, they found a book of Deuteronomy, the book of law, in the temple. She uses that account, and she uses Apostle Paul in the New Testament and his words from from the epistles of to the Corinthians. Then second, she uses Eusebius, she uses Jerome and Augustine. So from their lives and their writings, she tries to prove that Christianity committed fraud and fraudulent practices and forgery. Now, as I said, the rules of argument is the rules of arguing is that your premises need to be strong, and your premises need to support the conclusion. She said in her video that from the wealth of the literature that is available, the mass literature that is available, only a sample can be given.
But I have to note that of the great mass of literature that the defenders of Christianity have left for us, only a small sample can be given.
So let's see, her sample is strong and proves the conclusion. Let's go ahead looking at the first instance, the account of fraud and forgery in the Old Testament. Let's see.
Let's look at a story from the Old Testament that would give you an idea of the long history of deception through frauds and forgeries in Judeo-Christianity. By the end of the 7th century BCE, around 638, an 8-year-old Jewish prince named Josiah ascended the throne of Judah. Judah was the Jewish nation whose capital was Jerusalem. In the 18th year of Josiah's rule, in 621 BCE, while some repair work was being done in the Jerusalem temple, a remarkable discovery was made by the then priest Hilkiah. Hilkiah went and shared about his finding with Shaphan the scribe, and together they took their great find to Josiah. To verify the veracity of the find, Huldah, the lady fortune teller or prophetess, was consulted. With her help, it was concluded that this was the book of the law of Yahweh. It was at once concluded that this book was given to the ancestors of the present-day Israelites by Moses over 800 years before, and it was never heard of since. Now, Huldah at once declared that Yahweh was very angry about it, because the Israelite ancestors and the earlier kings that came before Josiah did not heed the words of this book. So what did the book actually say? It revealed that the traditional practices of the cult of Yahweh, the local god of Jerusalem, had been wrong up until that point.
So in the light of what she just said and we heard in the video clipping, she narrated the entire story. Let's look at the points of agreement. She agrees, number one, that there was a king by the name Josiah, and she agrees that there was a person by the name Hilkiah, and he goes to the temple, and as they were repairing the temple, they found a book, the book of the law. So she agrees that there was a book of law. And what else she agrees? She agrees to the story that is narrated in Second Chronicles. So she should be believing in the whole narrative that this is the truth, because if it is not true, then she cannot argue that there is something that such as this happened at so and so time. So she agrees to all these things, that the book was found, and there was a person by the name Hilkiah, and there was this king Josiah. She agrees to all this. Let's go up. Before we could go further, there is an assumption that she assumed here. That is, she said, Huldah, the lady fortune teller or prophetess, was consulted. With her help, it was concluded that this was the book of the law of Yahweh. It was at once concluded that this book was given to the ancestors of the present day Israelites by Moses over 800 years before, and it was never heard of since. Now, this is an assumption here. That is, the book was missing for 800 years. Does the scriptures anywhere suggest that the book was missing for 800 years? Do we see any evidence in her words? No evidence so far, but let's see if she will go ahead and provide the evidence that the book was missing for 800 years. Let's see.
The book also provided the authorization for an extensive religious and political reformation of the Jewish temple state of Judah. In adherence to the newly discovered law, Josiah ordered a thorough purification of the cult and abolition of all forms of polytheism from the Jewish religion and his kingdom. Now, this was something that was undertaken for the very first time in the history of Israel. Surprisingly, the stipulations also contained sanctions for territorial conquest and for the cleansing of the territory's inhabitants, which is basically ethnic cleansing. The now purified temple was declared to be the only legitimate religious institution, and Yahweh of Jerusalem the only deity whose worship would be permitted. All other gods and goddesses that were being worshipped until then were scrapped. Josiah's actions marked the birth of Judaism, the monotheistic version of the ancient Israelite religion.
She said that the book also provided the authorization for an extensive religious and political reformation. And she also said, now this was something that was undertaken for the very first time in the history of Israelites or Israel. Now what I see is that she ignored a very important fact. That is, if you read 2 Chronicles chapter 34 from verse 1 to 7, it talks about something very important, that Josiah was 8 years old when he became the king. He reigned in Jerusalem 31 years. Verse 2 says, he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord and followed the ways of his father David. Now, important thing is verse 3. In the 8th year of his reign, that is when the king Josiah was 16 years old, while he was still young, he began to seek the God of his father David. In 12th year, that is when he was 20 years old, he began to purge Judah and Jerusalem of the high places, Asherah poles and idols. Verse 4 says, under his direction, the altars of Baal were torn down. And when you read further, so here we see the Reformation took place 10 years prior to the finding of the book. When we read verse 8, in verse 8, when he was in the 18th year of Josiah's reign, that is when he was 26 years old, they found the book in the temple. But then when he was 16 years old, he took all the reformative activities. 10 years prior to finding the book, Reformation already started. So gradually we see a progressive Reformation 10 years prior to the finding of the book. So the basic misunderstanding or misconception or assumption that she assumed that book authorized Reformation. No, that's totally wrong, because the evidence says that it is the reformatory acts, when they were taking these reformatory, progressive reformatory actions, as a result they found the book, not other way around. They found the book when they were taking the reformatory actions and they were repairing the temple. So this is what she ignored. Let's see what further she says.
Now, several questions can be raised here, beginning with, why did the supposedly all-knowing Yahweh keep quiet for 800 years without even informing his prophets through visions and prophecies, as was the norm in the Israelite society back then, about a book that contained the only way that the Jewish religion should have been practiced? Answering this question and several such questions would lead to the conclusion that this entire episode was staged, meaning a fraud. And for Josiah to lament that Yahweh punished the Israelite ancestors because they disobeyed the laws of the book that they never knew existed, adds to the spuriousness of the whole episode.
She says, why God did not reveal to his prophets through visions or prophecies about a book that was missing for 800 years. That was, again, first of all, she didn't provide any kind of evidence that book was missing for 800 years old. Then, basing on this assumption, without giving any evidence that the book was missing for 800 years, she asks a question based on the assumption that why God didn't reveal to his prophets through visions and dreams or prophecies. Next, she asks, this book contained the only way that the Jewish religion should be practiced. Now, she again ignored one fact, that is, the very word Deuteronomy means second law. That means there is another law, that is first law. For any Jewish king, the whole Pentateuch, the 5 books of Moses, are considered as the law of God, the covenant of God, and so forth. So, for reformatory activities, he need not have only the book of the law, that is Deuteronomy. He has other books also, Genesis, Exodus, Numbers, and Leviticus. So far, I haven't seen any evidence that book was missing for 800 years. Let's see what further she said.
It was pointed out by Wilhelm Martin de Wet, one of the founding fathers of biblical criticism and theologians back in 1805, that firstly, the entire so-called Book of Law was written and planted by Hilkiah the chief priest, and secondly, the myth of its sudden mysterious discovery, yes, that's what he called it, the myth of its sudden mysterious discovery in the temple was made up by his son, the biblical prophet Jeremiah. By de Wet's assertion, the first is a forgery and the second is a fraud. This book was what makes up the Book of Deuteronomy in the Old Testament, either in part or whole. What this means is that the tradition that Moses wrote the Deuteronomy, or that Deuteronomy is of antiquity, is false.
Now here she quoted Wilhelm Martin de Wet. Now, the quote that appears on the screen are not the words of Wilhelm de Wet. It is a quote from Bible.org website. This is not even de Wet's words. It is someone else's quotes. David Malik, as I said in my previous video. But then let me give you the quote, what exactly Wilhelm de Wet said. He says we cannot know when and how this book came into the temple. Means David is saying that I don't know how in the first place book came in the temple. I will explain to you about this later, but let's continue reading what Wilhelm Dewitt says. Of course, it is possible that the priest Hilkiah had planted it. This opinion certainly has much at present to be said for itself. The whole manner in which the book is introduced resembles a contrived affair in which, besides Hilkiah, Shaphan in particular, and the prophetess Huldah could have had a part. Now in this words we see he is uncertain. He doesn't know, because he is clearly saying that this is my it could be possible. I don't know, we cannot know. Further, he says, still I am far from willing to elevate this conjuncture to certainty. Means I am very far. I am not elevating my conjuncture to certainty. Means I am not certain. This is just my conjuncture. Indeed, by doing so, I would overstep the laws of history. That is, I will be doing something that history doesn't or didn't do. Wherever the book may have come from, history has drawn a curtain over it, and it would be a mistake to wish to draw the curtain back. That is, history drawn a curtain. I cannot remove it. So I can only, this is my opinion, this is my conjuncture, I don't know for certain. So Wilhelm Dewitt says, I am not certain, I don't know, this is just my opinion. But Esther Dhanraj hasn't provided any evidence so far that the book was missing for 800 years, and there is no evidence that we see apart from opinion and conjectures. We have no evidence at all that the book was missing for 800 years and miraculously appeared. Now, if Hilkiah, Huldah and Shaphan were lying, if they were lying, then they have to come up with a bigger lie to explain something here. That is, imagine Hilkiah and Shaphan would come to the people and say that, hey people, listen, we found the book of Moses in the temple. We found the book of Moses in the temple. So people will ask that, okay, but how are you going to explain that the sudden appearance of the book in the temple? Because when Moses wrote, this temple wasn't existing. The temple wasn't there. They were moving from tabernacle to tabernacle. So in that case, how come this book moved from tabernacle to tabernacle, tabernacle to tabernacle? And Solomon built this temple, and this book miraculously landed up in the temple. How did it appear here in the first place? That's a big question. So they will, Huldah or Shaphan or Hilkiah, they have to come up with a bigger lie now. That is, we don't know, but it just miraculously appeared here. We don't know how it appeared. Now they have to come up with a bigger lie to explain this. But rather, I will provide evidence to you that book was never missing. It was always there. But this book was suppressed at the time of Josiah's grandfather's reign. Let me tell you, if we look at 2nd Chronicles chapter 33 verse 1 to 6, it says Manasseh, that is grandfather of Josiah, Manasseh was 12 years old when he became the king. I'm not reading the all the passages, but I will read. You can refer to 2nd Chronicles chapter 33 from verse 1 to 6. He says, it says, Manasseh did evil in the eyes of the Lord. He did some detestable practices. He built altars in the temple of God. In both the courts of the temple of the Lord, he built altars to all the starry hosts. He sacrificed his own children in the fire in the valley of Ben Hinnom. He did much evil in the eyes of the Lord. Now here you see Manasseh did evil in the sight of the Lord. In the very temple of the Lord, he built altars and sacrificed his own children in the fire. The book of Deuteronomy, the book of the law, it remained in the temple of God. Only the thing is that nobody bothered to remove it or read it. It was just lying there in the temple. Moving ahead, 2 Chronicles chapter 33, verse 7, 8 and 9 tells something very important. That is, Manasseh took the image he had made and put it in God's temple, of which God had said to David and his son Solomon. What did God say to David and Solomon? This is what God said. In this temple and in Jerusalem, which I have chosen out of all the tribes of Israel, I will put my name forever. I will not again make the feet of the Israelite leave the land I assigned to your ancestors. Listen carefully. If only they will be careful to do everything I commanded to them concerning all the laws, decrees, and regulations given through Moses. But Manasseh led Judah and the people of Jerusalem astray, to that they did more evil than the nations the Lord had destroyed before the Israelites. Now, when you look at verse 7, 8 and 9, 2 Chronicles chapter 33, verse 7, 8 and 9, it suggests that this law was available after writing of Moses. Joshua talks about the law in Joshua chapter 1 verse 8. So the book was available at the time of Joshua, the book of law. Not only that, this same book of the law was available to David and Solomon, who lived in 1000 BC. If Moses wrote, supposedly Moses wrote this book in 1455 BC, and by the time Joshua 1400 BC, the book was available to Joshua, and then David 1000 BC, the book was available. 950 BC, the book was available to Solomon, and Manasseh 687, the book was available, but Manasseh didn't adhere to the laws given by Moses, but led Judah and the people of Jerusalem astray. Now here we see the book was available, the laws which were given by Moses were available even to Manasseh, but he did not heed to the laws of the Lord, but he led Judah and Jerusalem, the people of Jerusalem, astray. So at that time, the book was lying out there in the temple. So the temple was corrupted. At the time of Josiah, when they were repairing the temple, they found the book. So here we have very strong evidence. You can read the scriptures. What I am suggesting sticks. But do we have any evidence that the book was missing for 800 years? Do we have any evidence that Hilkiah, Shaphan, and Huldah, or Josiah for that matter, planted this book? No. By the way, as I said, reformation took place 10 years prior to the finding of the book. So I see no reason why they would state something here. With no evidence at all, she claims that, in the end, she claims that the tradition that Moses wrote the Deuteronomy, or Deuteronomy is of antiquity, is false. Let me give you the evidence that Moses wrote the Deuteronomy. If you look at Deuteronomy chapter 1 verse 6 and verse 9, Deuteronomy chapter 5 verse 1, Deuteronomy chapter 27 verse 1 and 9, Deuteronomy chapter 29 verse 2, Deuteronomy chapter 31 verse 1 and verse 30, Deuteronomy chapter 33 verse 1. In all these instances, it is very clear that it was Moses who is speaking. Not only that, when we look at Deuteronomy chapter 31 verse 9 and verse 24, 25, 26. In these verses, verse 9 says, "So Moses wrote down this law and gave it to the Levitical priests." Verse 24, 25, 26 says, "After Moses finished writing in a book the words of this law from beginning to the end," verse 25, "he gave this command to the Levites who carried the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord." Verse 26, "Take this book of the law and place it beside the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord your God. There it will remain as a witness against you." So it's the document bears the signature of the person who wrote it. But for the counter evidence, neither she proved the evidence that the book was missing for 800 years. I have provided the evidence that the book was only suppressed and it was hiding in the temple because of the reign of Manasseh and the evil that he committed in the temple of the Lord and in the eyes of the Lord. And I have even provided, she said that the book, the Deuteronomy was written by Moses is a myth, but I have provided evidence that the book bears the mark of the author. We weighed her argument, we tested her argument, but her arguments found wanting. So you be the judge and you tell me whether her arguments is strong or not, whether we have conclusive evidence for her conclusion that the whole thing was staged at the time of Josiah and this is a fraud and fraudulent. You be the judge.
You have been weighed.
You have been measured.
And you absolutely
have been found wanting.
Welcome to the new world. God save you, if it is right that he should do so.